I am here today with my good friend Alex from Podcast Now, and something we've been thinking about recently with gaming is just budgets. Now, we're not exactly rich over here, either of us, but I do think that we can look at our household and know how to manage a budget and be careful to not go too far into debt. But with gaming, I think that these topics become very complicated. You know, how much money do you spend? How much will you get back? What is and is not reasonable? They are all valid questions, and yet where we're at right now with the video game market and gaming sphere, it really does feel like there has been a death of AA games, and there now has to almost be an extreme. It's either indie or some kind of massive production. There's no real in between. So we do have a question of the day today for you, though, which we'd love to hear your answers in the comments. What is a game that you think maybe did not use its budget very well, or cost a lot of money, and you're looking at it and you're like, where did that money go? I do think there's a few of them. I think the one that came to mind for me was Anthem immediately.
Oh, me too. Me too.
But there's a lot of games like that, unfortunately. And so, Alex, I kind of wanted your thoughts on this because, you know, we were talking about this before, and you have the specifics on this. There was even an ex-Sony developer or executive who was talking about trying to push AA games in this sphere and trying to have this in-between between indie and AAA, and how like the market just almost doesn't even want that anymore.
Yep. So Sean Layden, right, former head of PlayStation First Party Studios. So this is a guy that I very much respect. I think he was on it. I think he knew what he was doing, and he was obviously shown the boot right before Jim Ryan took over. And yeah, that was the stuff he was warning about kind of on his way out, right? Was we need games that are shorter. We need games that manage the budget better. And yeah, it's something that I think you and I both are pretty aware of when like almost any game, right? Like when any game comes out, you kind of think to yourself, all right, how much does this game need to make? Well, you know, what do we think the money could have been for it? And you can almost kind of predict like what the executives will say, right? Because if it's a game that took them 3 years to make and cost $50 million, a Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, right, costs like a tenth of the price of a CD Projekt Red title, and you know it makes so much money, and you say, okay, well you could call that, right? You can kind of know because they just play the budget so much better. You know, we talked about superhero games, right? Having an extra layer on top of it, where not only do they need to make money, they need to make that IP kind of licensing money back. So it becomes a mess. It's something that the gaming industry, I think, is honestly terrible. I will say this, the West is terrible at it. I think the East, honestly, is continuing to show that they are kind of elite, and they manage it extremely well, whether it's Japanese, Chinese, Korean, all these kind of new ones even too that are popping up. They do an incredible job of managing the budget, and over here in the West, we do a horrific job at it.
Yeah, something I was thinking about too, and I think my desktop might have made a random noise when you were talking, so if someone hears that in the video, sorry, but something that I was thinking about too was superhero games, and I'd love to make a video on this in the future, you know, kind of looking at it more in depth of what they used to be, or what they used to what they could be, you know, where you'd have a big budget game, but you could also have smaller budgets. Like, we don't see a lot of these types of games anymore. You know, you used to have things like a Spider-Man movie game, or a movie game based off of the Green Lantern film. Now, were these all good? No, some of them were great. Some of them were not good at all. But I think that, you know, like there was that potential, or even things like Infamous. Obviously, the first two Infamous games cost money, but if you look at how gaming money is spent now compared to then, it feels to me like they could do a lot more with a lot less. And they kind of did have that mentality of what Japan had, where Japan would put out a JRPG, and you'd have your huge tentpole ones, but you'd also have so many smaller ones that still did have depth of gameplay. Maybe they struggled a little bit with technical elements, you know, or performance or things like that, but they were still a good game that was made on a budget that fit the game so that it could be profitable. I don't really think that, you know, the trajectory we're at, you can have your GTA 6s, and I think that's totally fine. I've seen people say, oh, that hurts the industry overall, we can't, you know, there shouldn't be any of that. I think you can have your huge Hollywood-like releases, but I think for these developers to look at everything and say everything has to be that, to look at something like Marvel Spider-Man and say, we're going to put $300 million into this estimated, like that's more than most films, have budgets for, or at least a lot of films nowadays. There's whole superhero movies with CGI effects and all this stuff with smaller budgets than that, or around that budget, and you're putting that into a video game you have to sell for $70 a pop, and in the future probably more. I don't think this is a good trajectory.
Yeah, well, you say about the movie budgets, like Pirates 3, fun fact, Pirates 3 at the time was the most expensive film I think ever made. And I think Avengers has beaten it, a couple other movies, Avatars maybe have beaten it, but the highest you're getting for like a movie budget without marketing is around 300 million. And these are like the biggest things on the face of the earth. And what you're getting now with games is your Horizons cost 200 million. Your God of Wars cost 200, 250. And it's like, these are Spider-Man, more, Wolverine, X-Men, whatever they do next. But it's like you look at just some, and I mean, Horizon's big, God of War's big, but these are not like games that are going to sell 50, 60, 70 million units, and they cost $200 million. And that's just, and you're relying on these sales, movies. I think you're relying on a bigger army, right? Because it's less money for a ticket. It's unsustainable, and I think truly that's what Sean Layden, has gone on record multiple times and has warned about that stuff. And I very much relate, to what he says there. And I personally just don't get it. I think, here's what I'll say, and maybe we can bounce it off of you. Like, I think the cause is simply it takes too long. I think you literally look at where the budget, you could say, why do games literally cost this amount of money? You take X many people for X many years, and you have their salaries, and it's people cost more, right? Like the salaries are up versus 20 years ago. People are making a lot of money doing this, and your teams are 200, 300, 400, 500 people, and you're not paying them by the way. Okay, firstly, games back 15 years ago could be made with a team of 100. Infamous, a prototype back in 2009. Uncharted, the team was not more than 200. I think any of those teams weren't more than 200. Now they're 300 or 400. Okay, so they've doubled, so that's more money. And then also, you made Uncharted, the trilogy, in maybe 6-7 years of development time. Nowadays, it would take you 15 years to make a trilogy. So you have double the people, and you're paying them double the time. There's your money right there, right? That's millions of dollars on payroll every single year. So that's truly, in my opinion, it literally, why do games cost so much? They take too long to make. Why do games take too long to make? I think both of us have kind of talked about that stuff before as well, but we could go there.
Yeah, I think that in general, I mean, obviously there's corporate oversight. There's the idea of changing things. Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League comes to mind for me, where there were all of these different reports of like the head developers, people at the top saying, hey, we need to include this feature, and then not really checking it over and taking too long to check it over. And then by the time it's checked over, they've done a bunch of development on it. And then they say, actually get rid of that feature. That's not good. How many millions of dollars did you spend, just doing that? Because it's not, I think people like misunderstand where the money goes. You're right. It's time, because people should be paid a livable wage and they should be compensated for their work. Neither of us are arguing against that. But if you have people on a project, and let's say you have 400 people on a project for 5 years, that's going to cost a lot more than 215 people on a project for 3 years. That's going to cost a lot more. You have double the time and double the people. That's going to cost more than double. And then you have to think of like where our economy's at, too, in I mean, obviously the world, but especially the US, where money might be worth different amounts at different times, and that plays into it too. I do think, I mean, I did have a question for you that I wanted to ask you, and I think you can name a couple like right off the top of your head, but for me, when I think of games that went away, like that weren't being made because of this kind of thing, I think of things like the Crash Bandicoots and the Spyros and even the Jack and Daxters of the world, where there's no point to go back to them for an executive because they say this isn't The Last of Us, or this isn't, like a huge Hollywood type production that we know people will show up for. This is a smaller scale thing, and it's a question if they'll show up. I think that this leads to less trying. It leads to more trying to bet on certainties. It's why you don't see superhero games outside of like these very big specific characters. It's why you don't see, I think, Infamous anymore as much too, because I think if it was super profitable, PlayStation would move it away from Sucker Punch, who doesn't want to do it right now, and they'd say, hey, you over there, make an Infamous game, for us as a first party studio or second party or whatever, and let's do that. I think that you don't see them taking chances. So like, are there like ideas or games that you can think of that totally went away because of this or kind of died off?
Yeah, well, you mentioned specifics. I'll go genre as platformers, right? That's what really all of those are: Crash, Sly, Spyro, Jak and Dax, all of those. So, and I would say, in terms of structure, those 8 to 10 hour long single player games, that was really the defining thing of the PS3 360 era, right? The Resistance, Killzones, games that I always go to of like Puppeteer, the Transformers games, right? Fall and War, the Spider-Man games of Beanox and all them. So it really is those two that I can think of off the top of my head. But you're exactly right. That's what makes me more mad than anything, is like you end up always getting to the same arguments with budgets. And to me, it always comes down to, I just don't understand why companies can't spin off like 5 small studios. And like, I'd love to see one do it. And I've always like searched for an answer, I guess, in my head. I didn't do much research, but it's like, I imagine it's like the profit margins. I think that has to be it, right? Because you think, all right, you have 5 small studios, you have 5 teams of 70 people, and they make a game for like 3 years. That's totally possible. Like, you can absolutely do that. Astrobot, honestly, is actually a game like that. You make that game in 3-4 years. That team, I don't think, has more than 150 people. So I'm going a little bit smaller, but still same range. I mean, that's like, why can't we have 5 of those? And I guess the answer is, well, even if they do incredibly well, the money you're putting in, maybe that budget's 50 million, maybe you make 80 million from it. And it's like, oh, you made 30 million. Is that really worth doing? When Spider-Man, it takes so freaking long, takes a giant team. It's $300 million. Maybe you make 700 million from it and you made 400 million, right? So all that heartache and headache gets fixed because of that money at the end. That's, to me, that's gotta be the reason that these executives think of, but I don't know why you can't have both. I've always said, have your Guerrilla Games, have your Halo. Actually, Halo, you mentioned Spider-Man 2, 300 million. You know, Halo, I think in terms of rough reporting, Halo Infinite was around $500 million, which is one of, if not the biggest game budgets we've ever seen in our lives. So 500 million for Halo Infinite. Why can't we do that and then have like 5 small teams so you can get your big profit margin and you can also have some small ones? That's where I think the future is. I personally believe the first big company that thinks of that, and I think Nintendo's probably closest. Xbox sometimes does it, like Hi-Fi Rush. That's actually a really, but then they close it. They shut it down. So it's like Xbox kind of was right on it with Pentiment, right? They had that. They had Hi-Fi Rush. They have Hellblade. These are small games, small studios. But I mean, it's still not perfect. But I think Xbox was pretty close, but they're kind of terrible at it. Nintendo's roughly close. PlayStation just doesn't want to do it. PlayStation has Astrobot, and that's kind of it, and then all the big studios. So I think the first studio that figures out we can do big games and also have like a bunch of small teams of like 70 or less people, I think that's the studio that wins, because right now, like you said, it's eroding the middle. Right now you have indie and you have AAA or quadruple A, and that's it. And it's going to only get worse, in the next like 5 years.
Yeah, we almost see like a disparity. It's weird because in economics, which is what all of these executives should be actually well versed in, one of the first things they tell you is that you diversify. You diversify your portfolio. If you put everything in, let's say you're an investor, if you put everything in on red 32, almost like you're at a casino, like you just put it all in on one little spot, you can't do that with your portfolio, your investment portfolio, because what it does is, yes, you're right, if you succeed there, you're rich. But let's say you don't. Well, now you're poor. Now you have nothing. And we have a lot of studios now that have nothing. Some of them have lost their identity. Some of them have just completely conceded entire genres. I think PlayStation was pushing into the shooter genre at one point with games like Haze and Resistance. And, it's unfortunate because they looked at it and you know what they said? This can't be Halo, Call of Duty, or Battlefield. We're out. We're done. Give up. Killzone, nah. Like they had pushed into it, and when you don't have that competition, it also just makes the entire genre worse. If you have Killzone, Resistance, and let's say Haze had been better and actually been working out. Let's say you had Killzone, Haze, and Resistance on a rotating release every handful of years. Well, now that's pushing games, like Call of Duty and Halo and stuff. And that's why I think games like the more modern Wolfenstein and Doom are actually important, because like they're not just, you know, good games or games that can be viewed on their own. They're affecting that genre, and you can see when they're coming out that it is pushing other people. Whereas I think nowadays this budget thing, it's led to less competition, and it's led to entire genres being controlled by like tentpole releases. So I guess, you know, Alex, that's kind of my whole thing. I want your kind of your closing thoughts on it, like whether it's, you know, what I said or what you think about it, because obviously we're not solving the problem here, but I've always thought what you thought. You know, it's you can have your big thing, and maybe you even use that success to fund and grow some of those smaller things, and maybe eventually they can be bigger things too. It's, if you don't invest in them though, you won't try, you just let them die off, whether it's a series or an idea, you'll never grow your other things, and then if the big thing ever flops, you have nothing.
Yep. And even with that, like, I don't know, I don't understand, you know, how that is not the model. And I'll tell you this, like, I guess my closing thought, okay, Shuhei Yoshida, who's also a PlayStation legend, love the guy, a great speaker and thinker. He, you know, obviously he's gone now, but he had said in a bunch of these interviews, so they use the remasters to do what you just said, and they actually do the exact thing you said, but opposite. So PlayStation specifically, and I imagine this is the way with others too, when they remaster Spider-Man, when they remaster Miles, when they remaster Last of Us, that's a very low amount of money they're spending on it. So they do have the idea, right? Spend very little amount of money. They spend very little, and the games do really well. So there's your high profit, but it's not that high. It's maybe they make 30, 40, 50 million off of it. That money funnels into their big games. And that's what he had said like 2 months ago. And I saw that and I said, okay, I mean, it makes sense like how they view it, but it's exactly the opposite, because that's, you know, I mean, it quite literally is exactly the opposite of what you just said. They're using remasters, which firstly, you need good games to even remaster in the first place, right? And you have less of them by not making as many games. So you're remastering these giant, you know, colossal games, and then you're using the money from those remasters to fund Horizon 3, God of War, whatever, you know, Uncharted, all that stuff. And it's like, well, like you said, shouldn't it be when you hit these big successes with the big games, yeah, you take the money you need for that big game, but then you funnel the rest into creative stuff. They do the exact opposite, and they don't even mention the creative stuff. They don't even talk about that. So that should just show you how screwed, you know, the entire situation is. But no, I mean, it's bad. It needs to be fixed. And, you know, Sean Layden said it 1,000 times, and I don't want to just echo everything he said, but like it does need to change, with especially now all these layoffs, thousands and thousands, and studio closures. We are entering an age where it's a couple big studios, and AI is a big part of it and all that jazz. Big studios, small indie teams, and that's it. You don't even get those AA inventive games, because you know what? A lot of the indie games, by the way, they can either be really good or also really trash. Like, there's not actually that much in between for an indie game. So I think we're really missing that nice little AA. It's made from 60 industry veterans. They didn't like how the big corporation ran it. They make their own studio, which is why I always back them, the Rebel Wolves of the world that are making that Blood of Dawnwalker. I always cover those. I always talk about those, because I think that's the future. These people that were, you know, thrown out of their kingdom of these big studios, they come in and they make a middle tier game that's not going to blow you out of the water, but maybe it has a couple cool ideas. That's a AA game to me, and that's quickly being erased, and there's only a handful out there. So either you fix it, or that's the future in, honestly, probably less than 5 years, probably by the next generation of consoles. So it is getting very bad. It's a little depressing, but you know, there's always something to play, so I think you and I are okay.
Yeah, and I think it's also different for people like us who collect old games, you know, and are willing to like buy retro games. Like you said, we always have something to play. Like, there's hundreds, probably thousands of AA games from the past when they did make them that you and I can play on consoles or emulate or whatever. I think what's unfortunate is that what this does is it hurts the trajectory of the industry going forward. You have less of that, what I truly think is art for the future generations. You know, you don't want to just cap off the art gallery. You know, you don't want to just say, well, we had a good run back in the 90s and 2000s, everything can be trashed now. It's like, we still want this stuff to be good, and I think that's why we talk about it. So Alex, thank you so much for being here. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me, man. It's always a blast, and I love talking about these type of topics.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It's you know, maybe someday we'll be in charge of a budget.
Exactly. Exactly.
Let us know what you think in the comments down below. We always do appreciate you. If you want to support this channel, all those ways are in the description. But what I really ask you to do is check out Alex's channels, Podcast Now Plus, especially Podcast Now Back to the Past. Fantastic content. If you care about the history of video games or preservation, like game preservation, things like that, that is something that I highly recommend you check out that channel. It's a channel that I truly like. Podcast Now Back to the Past, and all of that will be in the description down below. Lots of great stuff there, so I hope you'll check it out. Have a fantastic day, and as always, everyone, stay shway.